I still remember the exact moment when everything I thought I knew about myself shattered into 1,000 pieces. It was at Marcus Aldridge's company launch party, one of those events where the city's elite gather to celebrate wealth and power. I was standing in the middle of that glittering ballroom, surrounded by people in designer suits and expensive perfumes, when a police officer looked me directly in the eyes and asked me a question that would change my life forever. But to understand why that moment mattered so much, why it became the turning point that forced me to finally face the truth I'd been running from for years, I need to take you back to the beginning. Back to when I was just another face in the crowd, pretending to be someone I wasn't, living a life that looked perfect on the outside but felt hollow on the inside. My name is David, and I'm 34 years old. I work as a senior marketing consultant for a firm in downtown Seattle, the kind of job that sounds impressive at dinner parties and pays well enough to afford a decent apartment in Capitol Hill. For the past 3 years, I'd been dating Sarah, a corporate lawyer with ambition that matched her intelligence. We were the kind of couple people envied, the kind that got invited to all the right events, the kind that seemed destined for engagement announcements and tasteful wedding registrations. My parents loved her. My friends thought we were perfect together, and I thought I was happy. Or at least I told myself I was happy enough. That's what you do when you've spent your entire life building an image of who you're supposed to be, right? You convince yourself that the discomfort you feel is normal, that everyone experiences this vague sense of something missing, that the way you sometimes catch yourself staring at other men in coffee shops or at the gym doesn't mean anything at all. I grew up in a conservative household in Spokane, the kind of place where church on Sunday wasn't optional, and where certain topics were simply never discussed. My father worked in construction management, my mother taught elementary school, and my older brother followed in Dad's footsteps into the family business. I was the one who went to college, got the degree in marketing, moved to the big city. I was the success story, the one who made it out and made something of himself. And part of that success story, the unspoken part, was that I would find a nice woman, settle down, give my parents grandchildren, and continue the legacy of normalcy that defined our family. So that's what I did. I dated women throughout college, had a few serious relationships, and eventually found Sarah. She was everything I was supposed to want, smart and beautiful and driven. When I was with her, I could almost forget about the other thoughts, the ones I'd been pushing down since I was a teenager, the ones that surfaced late at night when I was alone with nothing but my own mind for company. The invitation to Marcus Aldridge's company launch arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in early September. It came through my firm, a gilded envelope with embossed lettering that announced the grand opening of Aldridge Technology's new Seattle headquarters. Marcus Aldridge was a name everyone in the business world knew, a tech billionaire who'd made his fortune in software development and had recently pivoted into sustainable energy solutions. He was 47 years old, ruthlessly successful, and known for his lavish parties and demanding personality. The launch party was going to be the social event of the season, and my firm had secured a handful of invitations for their top consultants. I was one of them. Sarah was thrilled when I told her. She saw it as an opportunity for networking, a chance to rub shoulders with the kind of people who could open doors for both of our careers. I agreed to take her as my +1, and we spent the next 2 weeks preparing, her shopping for the perfect dress, me making sure my best suit was cleaned and pressed. The night of the party arrived with that particular kind of autumn crispness that Seattle does so well, when the air smells like rain and fallen leaves and possibility. Sarah looked stunning in a navy blue dress that hugged her curves in all the right places, her dark hair swept up in an elegant twist. I wore my charcoal gray suit with a white shirt and a burgundy tie, the uniform of professional success. We took a car service to the venue, a converted warehouse in South Lake Union that Aldridge had transformed into a modern palace of glass and steel. The place was already packed when we arrived, hundreds of people milling about with champagne flutes, the sound of a live jazz band competing with the buzz of conversation. Everything gleamed, from the polished marble floors to the crystal chandeliers hanging from exposed wooden beams. It was the kind of place designed to make you feel both important and inadequate at the same time. We'd been there for maybe half an hour, making small talk with colleagues and strangers, when I first saw him. Officer James Mitchell. He was standing near the entrance in full uniform, one of several police officers hired to provide security for the event. I noticed him because he wasn't doing what the other security personnel were doing. While they scanned the crowd with professional detachment, he seemed to be actually watching people, reading them, his dark eyes moving from face to face with an intensity that made my stomach tighten. He was tall, maybe 6 feet 2 inches, with broad shoulders that filled out his uniform in a way that suggested he spent serious time in the gym. His hair was dark and cut short, his jaw strong and covered with a shadow of stubble that suggested his shift had started early. There was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence mixed with a kind of weariness, that made him seem older than he probably was. I guessed he was somewhere in his late 30s, maybe 40, and I couldn't stop looking at him. I told myself it was just curiosity, just the natural human tendency to notice someone who stands out in a crowd. But that wasn't true, and some part of me knew it even then. I was drawn to him in a way I hadn't been drawn to anyone in a long time, maybe ever. When Sarah touched my arm to point out someone she wanted to introduce me to, I had to consciously pull my attention away from the officer by the door. I spent the next hour trying to focus on networking, on making the right impressions, on being the person everyone expected me to be. But my eyes kept finding him across the room, and more than once I caught him looking back at me. Each time our gazes met, something electric passed between us, something I didn't have a name for, but that made my pulse quicken and my palms sweat. The incident happened around 9 o'clock, just as Marcus Aldridge was preparing to give his speech. I'd stepped away from Sarah to use the restroom, and on my way back I found myself near the main entrance where Officer Mitchell was stationed. I wasn't planning to talk to him. I was just walking past, my mind occupied with thoughts I was trying very hard not to think, when I heard raised voices. A small crowd had gathered near the door, and at the center of it was Marcus Aldridge himself, his face flushed with anger, gesturing sharply at a young couple who stood before him looking confused and frightened. The man was maybe 25, dressed in a suit that was nice but not quite expensive enough for this crowd, his arm protectively around his boyfriend's waist. That's when I realized what was happening. Aldridge was refusing to let them in, his voice carrying across the marble floor as he declared that his event was for serious professionals, not for people who wanted to make a spectacle of themselves. I froze. The words he was using were coded, careful, the kind of language that allowed for plausible deniability, but everyone within earshot understood exactly what he meant. He was turning away a gay couple, and he was doing it in front of dozens of witnesses at his own party. The young men looked devastated, the kind of public humiliation that burns itself into your memory forever, and no one was doing anything. All these successful, progressive Seattle professionals were just standing there, some looking uncomfortable, others pretending not to notice, but no one was speaking up. I felt something inside me crack, a fissure opening in the carefully constructed wall I'd built around certain parts of myself. And before I could think about what I was doing, before I could stop myself, I heard my own voice cutting through the awkward silence. I said that this was wrong, that they had as much right to be here as anyone else, that excluding someone based on who they loved was discrimination, plain and simple. My voice was shaking, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, but I kept talking. I said that if Aldridge was going to turn them away, then he should turn me away too, because I wasn't going to be part of an event that treated people like this. The words came out before I'd fully processed what I was saying, what I was implying, what door I was opening that I'd kept locked for so long. The room went absolutely silent. Everyone was staring at me now, including Sarah, who stood frozen across the room with an expression of complete shock on her face. And Marcus Aldridge turned his cold gaze on me, his lips curling into something between a smile and a sneer. He asked me if I was sure I wanted to make this about myself, if I really wanted to throw away my professional reputation over people I didn't even know. He said it in a tone that was almost friendly, almost concerned, but with an undercurrent of threat that made it clear he knew exactly who I was, what firm I worked for, what consequences this could have for my career. I felt the weight of that threat, felt the life I'd built teetering on the edge of collapse. But I also felt something else, something I'd been missing for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like. I felt real. I felt honest. I felt like myself for the first time in years. So I stood my ground, my hands clenched into fists at my sides, and I told him yes, I was sure. That's when Officer Mitchell stepped forward. He moved with a deliberate calm that somehow made him more intimidating than if he'd rushed in with aggression. He positioned himself between Aldridge and me, his body language making it clear whose side he was on, and in a voice that was quiet but carried absolute authority. He informed Aldridge that he was witnessing what appeared to be discrimination based on sexual orientation, which was illegal in the state of Washington. He said that if Aldridge wanted to continue refusing entry to guests based on their sexual orientation, he would need to do so with the understanding that it could result in legal consequences. He said it calmly, professionally, but with an edge that suggested he would be more than happy to make those consequences a reality. The tension in that moment was suffocating. Aldridge's face had gone from flushed to pale, his jaw working as he calculated the cost of pushing this further. Around us, people had their phones out, recording, the threat of social media exposure adding weight to the officer's words. And I stood there, my entire body trembling, aware that I'd just done something that couldn't be undone, that I'd just publicly aligned myself with something I'd spent my entire adult life running from. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, Aldridge stepped back, his expression transforming into a mask of professional courtesy. He apologized to the young couple with words that sounded hollow and rehearsed, gestured for them to enter, and then turned and walked away without another glance at me. The crowd began to disperse, the moment of drama passing as people returned to their champagne and their networking. But Officer Mitchell didn't move. He stood there looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between concern and recognition, like he saw something in me that I'd been trying to hide. He asked if I was okay, if I needed anything, his voice low enough that only I could hear. And I realized I was shaking, my whole body vibrating with adrenaline and fear and something else, something that felt dangerously close to exhilaration. I told him I was fine, thanked him for intervening, and then I made the mistake of looking directly into his eyes. Have you ever had a moment where you suddenly understand something about yourself that you've been denying for so long, it's become part of your foundation? That's what happened when I looked at Officer James Mitchell. I saw kindness in his eyes, and understanding, and something else that made my breath catch. I saw that he knew. He knew what it had cost me to speak up, knew what I'd been hiding, knew because maybe he'd been there himself. And in that moment of recognition, something inside me broke open completely. I felt tears burning in my eyes, felt my carefully constructed mask crumbling, and I had to look away before I completely fell apart in the middle of Marcus Aldridge's party. Sarah found me a few minutes later. She pulled me aside into a quiet corner, her face a mixture of confusion and anger and hurt. She asked me what the hell that was, what I'd been thinking, why I'd risked everything for strangers. But what she was really asking, what I could hear underneath the words, was whether what I'd said meant what she thought it meant. I tried to explain, tried to find words that would make this okay, that would let me take it back and return to the comfortable lie we'd been living. But I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. Instead, I stood there looking at this woman I'd spent 3 years with, this woman I'd told myself I loved, and I felt nothing but a deep, aching sadness for both of us. She deserved someone who could love her the way she deserved to be loved, and I deserved to stop pretending to be someone I wasn't. I told her I was sorry. I told her she deserved better than someone who was still figuring himself out. I told her a lot of things that night, standing in that corner while the party continued around us. But what I didn't tell her was the complete truth. I couldn't, not yet, because I was still trying to understand it myself. She left the party in tears, and I let her go, knowing that I'd just ended the relationship that was supposed to lead to marriage and children, and the life my parents had always imagined for me. And instead of feeling devastated, instead of feeling like I'd made a terrible mistake, I felt relieved. I felt like I could finally breathe. I should have left then too. I should have called a car and gone home and started dealing with the wreckage of what I'd just done, but I didn't. Instead, I found myself walking back through the party, looking for Officer Mitchell, needing to talk to him again, even though I didn't know what I would say. I found him outside, taking a break near the loading dock where the catering trucks were parked. He was leaning against the brick wall, his jacket unbuttoned, a cup of coffee in his hands. When he saw me approaching, he straightened up, and I saw something flicker across his face that might have been surprise or might have been something else. I thanked him again for what he'd done inside. I told him that it meant more than he probably realized, that he'd helped me do something I should have done a long time ago. He listened without interrupting, his dark eyes never leaving my face, and when I finished talking, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he told me his name was James, and he asked if I wanted to take a walk. Just like that, as simple as asking about the weather. And I said yes, even though I knew that saying yes meant crossing another line, opening another door I wouldn't be able to close. We walked through the industrial streets of South Lake Union, past dark warehouses and closed offices, the sounds of the party fading behind us. James didn't ask me invasive questions or push me to explain myself. Instead, he talked about his own life, about growing up in a small town in Montana, about joining the police force because he wanted to help people, about the moment when he was 26 and finally admitted to himself that he was gay. He talked about the fear and the relief that came with that admission, about losing friends and family members who couldn't accept it, about building a new life in Seattle where he could be himself. And as he talked, I felt something inside me unraveling, all the tension I'd been carrying for years slowly releasing. I told him things I'd never told anyone. I told him about the thoughts I'd had since I was a teenager, the ones I'd always dismissed or rationalized or buried. I told him about the relationships with women that had always felt like I was playing a role, about the nights I'd lain awake next to Sarah wondering why I felt so disconnected, about the shame that had lived in my chest for so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. And James listened to all of it without judgment, without trying to fix anything or tell me what to do. He just walked beside me through the dark streets and listened, and that simple act of witnessing felt more intimate than anything I'd experienced in years. We ended up at a 24-hour diner near Pike Place Market, sitting across from each other in a booth with cracked vinyl seats and coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner too long. James had changed out of his uniform by then, wearing jeans and a gray Henley that made him look younger, more approachable. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing, the conversation flowing easily in a way that felt natural and right. He told me about his partner, a man named David, ironically enough, who died in a car accident 3 years ago. He talked about the grief and the loneliness that had followed, about learning to live with loss, and I realized that this man sitting across from me, this person I'd met only hours ago, understood me in ways that people I'd known for years never had. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, as the diner began to fill with the after-bar crowd, James reached across the table and covered my hand with his. It was a simple gesture, nothing dramatic or overtly sexual, just one human being offering comfort to another. But I felt it like an electric shock, felt it all the way through my body, and I understood with perfect clarity that this was what I'd been missing. This connection, this recognition, this sense of being seen for who I actually was, rather than who I was pretending to be. I turned my hand over so our palms touched, and we sat like that for a long moment, not speaking, just existing in that space of understanding. He asked me if I wanted to come back to his place, and I knew what he was really asking. I knew that saying yes would mean crossing the final line, would mean acting on feelings I'd spent my entire life denying. I thought about Sarah, about my parents, about my job and my reputation, and all the reasons I should say no. I thought about the life I'd built and how it would all change if I did this. And then I thought about how I'd felt standing up to Marcus Aldridge, how I'd felt walking through the streets with James, how I'd felt sitting in this diner being honest for the first time in my life. And I said yes. His apartment was in Fremont, a 1-bedroom on the 3rd floor of an old building with hardwood floors and high ceilings. It was neat, but lived in, with bookshelves full of paperbacks and photographs on the walls, showing James with friends, with family, with the man who'd been his partner. We stood in his living room, and suddenly I was terrified, my heart racing so fast I felt dizzy. James must have seen it on my face because he stepped closer and told me we didn't have to do anything, that we could just talk more if that's what I wanted, that there was no pressure. But I didn't want to just talk. I wanted to stop thinking, stop analyzing, stop being afraid. So I closed the distance between us and kissed him. It was nothing like kissing Sarah had been, nothing like any kiss I'd experienced before. It was urgent and desperate and real, and I felt something in my chest crack wide open Years of denial and repression flooding out all at once. James kissed me back with a gentleness that somehow made it more intense, his hands cupping my face, and I felt tears streaming down my cheeks, even as I pressed closer to him. We moved to his bedroom, shedding clothes between kisses, and I was shaking so hard he had to steady me. He asked me again if I was sure, if this was what I wanted, and I told him yes. Yes, I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. What happened that night was both exactly what I needed and completely overwhelming. James was patient and careful, checking in with me constantly, making sure I was okay. And I was more than okay. I was present in my body in a way I'd never been before, every touch and sensation magnified, every moment feeling significant. Afterwards, we lay tangled together in his sheets, my head on his chest, his fingers tracing patterns on my back. I felt raw and exposed and vulnerable, and also more at peace than I could remember feeling. James didn't try to make it into something it wasn't, didn't ask me about the future or what this meant. He just held me while I cried, releasing years of shame and fear and loneliness, and told me it was okay, that I was okay, that everything was going to be okay. I left his apartment as the sun was rising, the city waking up around me. I walked home through streets that looked the same as they always had but felt completely different, like I was seeing them for the first time. My phone had dozens of missed calls and messages from Sarah, from friends, from colleagues who'd been at the party. I ignored all of them. When I got home, I stood in my shower for 40 minutes, letting the hot water run over me, and I finally let myself think about what I'd done, what it meant, who I really was. And instead of the panic and regret I'd always imagined would come with this realization, I felt calm. I felt clear. I felt like I'd finally found something I'd been searching for my entire life, without knowing I was searching for it. The next few weeks were brutal. Sarah and I had the breakup conversation I'd been too cowardly to have that night at the party, and it went about as well as you'd expect. She was hurt and angry and felt betrayed, and she had every right to those feelings. I tried to explain, tried to help her understand that this wasn't about her, that she'd done nothing wrong. But how do you explain to someone that you'd been lying to both of them the entire time you were together? My parents called after Sarah told them we'd broken up, and I could hear the disappointment in my mother's voice, even as she tried to be supportive. I wasn't ready to tell them the real reason yet, wasn't ready for that conversation, so I let them think it was just a normal breakup. Work was complicated. The video of the confrontation at Aldridge's party had made its way onto social media, and while most of the response was supportive, there were enough negative comments and speculation to make things awkward at the office. My boss called me in for a meeting where he tried to be diplomatic, while essentially asking me not to make any more public scenes that could reflect poorly on the firm. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it, at the idea that standing up against discrimination was somehow more problematic than the discrimination itself. But I kept my job, mostly because I was good at what I did, and the firm didn't want to deal with the optics of firing someone who'd been defending LGBTQ rights. Through all of this, James was there. Not in an overwhelming way, not trying to push for something I wasn't ready for, but just present. We texted throughout the day, met for coffee or dinner when our schedules allowed, and slowly, carefully, I began to build a new understanding of who I was. He introduced me to his friends, most of whom were gay or queer, and for the first time in my life I was in spaces where I didn't have to hide or pretend. I started going to LGBTQ community events, started reading books and articles about coming out later in life, started seeing a therapist who specialized in sexual identity, and gradually, piece by piece, I began to construct a new life that felt authentic. The hardest conversation was with my parents. I waited until Thanksgiving, when I'd be seeing them in person anyway, and I told them over coffee the morning after I arrived. My father was silent, his face unreadable, while my mother cried. Not angry tears, but sad ones, and she kept asking where she'd gone wrong, what she could have done differently. I tried to explain that she hadn't done anything wrong, that this was just who I was, that I'd been this way all along even when I didn't have the words or courage to admit it. My father eventually spoke, and what he said was that he needed time to process this, that it wasn't what he'd expected or wanted from me, but that I was still his son. It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it wasn't rejection either. It was something in between, something I could work with. My brother surprised me. He called a few days after I told my parents, and instead of judgment or disappointment, he just asked if I was happy. When I told him I was happier than I'd been in years, he said that was all that mattered to him. He asked about James, wanted to know how we met, what he did, whether it was serious. And I realized I didn't know how to answer that last question. James and I had been seeing each other for 2 months by then, but we'd never defined what we were doing, never put a label on it. We were just two people who'd found each other at the right moment, helping each other navigate complicated lives. I asked James about it one night in December, as we sat in his apartment watching snow fall outside his window. I asked him what we were doing, where this was going, whether he saw a future for us. He was quiet for a long time, and I thought maybe I'd pushed too hard, asked for too much too soon. But then he turned to me and said that he cared about me deeply, that these past months had been some of the best he'd had since losing his partner, but that he also knew I was still figuring things out, still building my new life. He said he didn't want to pressure me into something I wasn't ready for, didn't want to be a rebound or an experiment. And I understood what he was saying, understood that he was protecting both of us from getting hurt. But I also knew that what I felt for James wasn't an experiment or a phase. It was real and deep and unlike anything I'd experienced before. So I told him that, told him I was still figuring things out, but that I wanted to figure them out with him, that he'd become one of the most important people in my life in a remarkably short time. I told him I was scared of how much I felt for him, scared of how vulnerable he made me feel, but that I didn't want to run from that fear anymore. I'd spent too much of my life running. And James pulled me close and kissed me, and we stayed up most of that night talking about what we wanted, what scared us, what we hoped for. We decided to take things slow, to keep building what we had without rushing into labels or long-term commitments. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was honest, and honesty was something I'd learned to value above almost everything else. Over the next few months, our relationship deepened naturally. I met his family when they visited Seattle for Christmas, and while his parents were kind and welcoming, I could see the sadness in their eyes when they looked at me, the ghost of their son's lost partner, hanging between us. But they didn't make me feel like an intruder or a replacement. They just made me feel like someone their son cared about, and that was enough. I started coming out to friends, one by one, having the conversation over and over until it became easier. Some people were surprised, others claimed they'd always known. A few drifted away. I learned who my real friends were during those months, learned who was willing to accept all of me versus who had only ever liked the version of me I'd been performing. It was painful but necessary. This sorting of relationships, this clearing away of connections that had been based on lies. Sarah and I eventually had coffee, several months after the breakup, and she told me she was dating someone new, a man from her law firm who made her laugh and didn't make her feel like she was constantly trying to prove herself. She said she'd been angry at me for a long time, felt like I'd wasted years of her life, but that she'd come to understand it wasn't that simple. She said she hoped I was happy, and I could tell she meant it, even if there was still hurt underneath. I apologized again for everything, and she accepted it with the grace she'd always had. We wouldn't be friends, probably never would be, but we'd found a kind of peace with each other. Work settled into a new normal. The initial awkwardness faded as people got used to the idea of me being gay, and I found myself becoming an informal resource for other LGBTQ employees at the firm, helping them navigate the subtle politics of being out in a corporate environment. It wasn't a role I'd sought out, but it felt meaningful, like something good had come from that night at Aldridge's party. I heard through the grapevine that Marcus Aldridge had quietly settled a discrimination lawsuit filed by the young couple he'd tried to turn away, and that his company's reputation had taken a significant hit. I felt a grim satisfaction in that, in knowing that standing up had mattered. James and I moved in together in the spring, almost a year after we'd met. It felt right, natural, like the next logical step in something that had been building since that first night. His apartment became our apartment. His life became intertwined with mine, and I learned what it meant to build a life with someone based on truth rather than performance. We had our challenges, of course. I was still learning how to be in a same-sex relationship, still navigating internalized homophobia I didn't even know I had. James was patient with my learning curve, but also didn't let me get away with avoidance or backsliding. He pushed me to be better, to be braver, to keep choosing authenticity even when it was hard. My parents came to visit that summer, their first time seeing me since I'd come out to them. It was tense at first, everyone trying too hard to be normal. But James won them over with his quiet kindness and terrible dad jokes. I watched my mother warm to him over the course of the weekend, saw my father's stiff politeness gradually soften into something approaching acceptance. On their last day, my father asked James to take a walk with him, just the two of them, and I spent those 30 minutes convinced that everything was about to fall apart. But when they came back, my father shook James's hand and thanked him for taking care of me, and I saw tears in both their eyes. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Looking back now, almost 2 years after that night at Marcus Aldridge's party, I sometimes try to imagine what my life would be like if I'd stayed silent, if I'd let that young couple be turned away without saying anything, if I'd gone home with Sarah and continued pretending. I can't do it. That version of me feels like a stranger, someone I knew once but don't recognize anymore. The person I am now, the person who lives with James and goes to Pride events and doesn't apologize for who he loves, feels more real than I ever did in those 34 years of performance. I'm not going to tell you it's been easy, because it hasn't. Coming out later in life means rebuilding everything, questioning every relationship and assumption and plan you'd made. It means dealing with people who think you should have known sooner, should have been braver earlier, should have spared the people you hurt along the way. It means carrying guilt for the time you wasted and the people you hurt while you were figuring yourself out. But it also means finally being able to breathe. It means looking in the mirror and recognizing the person looking back. It means building a life based on truth instead of fear. James tells me sometimes that I'm one of the bravest people he knows, and I always laugh because I don't feel brave. I feel like I spent most of my life being a coward, hiding from the truth, hurting people because I was too scared to face myself. But he says, that's not what bravery is. He says bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to be honest even when you're terrified of the consequences. And maybe he's right. Maybe standing up that night at the party, maybe coming out to my family, maybe building this life with him, maybe all of that counts as brave, even though it felt like I was just trying to survive. I still think about that moment sometimes, when Officer James Mitchell stepped forward and made it clear he wasn't going to let discrimination happen on his watch. I think about how one person choosing to act with integrity can change everything, can give someone else the courage they need to finally be themselves. I think about the young couple who were turned away, and I hope they're doing okay. Hope they found spaces where they're celebrated instead of excluded. I think about all the people who are still hiding, still pretending, still living lives that don't fit because they're too scared to face the truth. And I want to tell them that I understand, that I was there too, that the fear is real, but so is the freedom on the other side. My truth set me free. It didn't happen all at once, and it wasn't a fairy tale transformation. It was messy and painful and complicated, and I hurt people along the way, people who didn't deserve to be hurt. But it also gave me a life worth living, a relationship built on honesty, a sense of self I'd never had before. If you're listening to this and you recognize something in my story, if you've been carrying a secret that's eating you alive, if you're pretending to be someone you're not because you're scared of what will happen if you stop, I want you to know you're not alone. There are so many of us who've walked this path, who felt that same fear and made the choice to be authentic anyway. If this story touched you, if it made you feel a little less alone in whatever you're going through, leave a like. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like mine, stories about people finding the courage to be themselves. And if you want, tell me in the comments where you're listening from, or just write, "My truth set me free," because it does. It really does. You're not alone, and it's never too late to start living as your authentic self. Thank you for listening to my story.